how do you see the business changing in the next few years? I mean, I think the right answer is we have, at least I have no idea. There's a lot of different movements that are very interesting right now. You've got the whole Let's Play esports movement that is happening. I think there's a lot of room to explore there. You've got VR, which might or might not be a fluke. It's really hard to tell at this point because it hasn't actually launched as a commercial product, and there's no evidence that's to suggest that it will be a huge commercial product. But it might, because they've got big backers, they've got large investments. The people that are working on it know what they're doing. Then beyond that, it seems we're all just walking in a circle. The mobile games industry is starting to do PC games because mobile is not making enough money for what they're putting into it, and discoverability is a huge issue. And then the PC game developers are starting to move to console because PC has discoverability issues as well. So it's easier to get discovered on console. And then the console developers are all starting to go to mobile because console is getting too expensive and too hard for the return it's making. So we're all walking in a circle. I think nobody really knows what is happening right now. We're all just kind of trying to change our models in different ways to see what does stick. I think a lot of parts of the industry right now are kind of saturated. And I think that even though people are finding new spaces to kind of like compete in and to create some space for themselves, at this point it seems that if you have like an established brand, you can try and survive based on that, or you really need to come in with force and do something that just takes the world by storm, because anything in between is not working right now. So I don't actually know, like it might be a crash, it might be like this but sustained, it might be that VR opens up new markets, or that esports opens up new space for developers to find attention, but at this point it seems completely opaque as to what the right move is.
And I think that's like one of the main reasons why I think we're maybe going to see more different types of technology soon, like VR. I think a lot of developers are going to expand into VR because it's so crowded right now. Like the three things that are going around that you just mentioned, I think a lot of developers are going to feel like, well, you know, discoverability on VR is going to be 1,000 times better. Like imagine being among the first 10 games that launch on VR. I think that's why a lot of developers are going to invest in VR.
Yeah.
And in other things as well, like things that we haven't even thought of yet.
I mean, you alternatively beyond VR, you've got AR already. Like there's already things beyond that happening. Like there's so much happening, and there's so many new things. And I think part of that is just necessity. Like there's space for new hardware now because on the software side, everything is saturated. So there's space in hardware. Just what are people going to do with that? If it's interesting, if that works. Like Apple jumped in right now, and Apple usually knows their timing. So Apple jumping in with Apple TV, with tvOS, is a pretty big sign that this is the point where new hardware is at its most viable, because they wouldn't be introducing it if that wasn't the right time. Although, you know, not to say that Apple always gets it right, because they also introduced the pencil. But I think Apple TV was a big giveaway that hardware is a good space right now.
Yeah, but I do think the one thing we know is that costs are going up. We know that they're going up probably even faster in marketing costs and business costs than they are in development costs. And every time that's happened, there's always been a fairly predictable result. It tends to close down or consolidate most of the smaller shops because they have to get both more business savvy and larger in order to sustain themselves, right? And I think that's why we're hearing now this talk about triple I or whatever. Basically, it's the same thing that once upon a time built Sierra and Activision and EA. It's the same kind of process where when the market gets that crowded, you have to compete on content, you have to compete on visuals, you have to compete on business and marketing and brand and character, and all these things just add up. They just get really expensive. And I think there's going to be, of course, some small shops that have great talent at it and will find their way through. But a lot of shops just are not going to have it, and they'll get bought or chewed up or disappear. And it's kind of the cycle of life, I think. I'm less optimistic about hardware changes because historically hardware changes have helped because they lowered the cost, right? That's the secret. You switch platforms because, oh, Apple TV is there now, or VR TV is there now. Marketing budget falls because there's only 10 games,
Yeah.
right? But Apple TV is not going to launch with 10 games. Apple TV is going to have 2,000 games within a week, right? They'll have 10 on day one, but everybody is going to port because it's going to share the ecosystem. VR is not that cheap to get into. It has fairly high tech requirements, right? 120 FPS and all of the rest. And so it's not resetting the cost curve the way mobile did or the way Facebook did, right? Those were huge resets. All of a sudden, a Pac-Man sized game was viable. I don't know that a Pac-Man sized game is going to be viable with this new hardware shift.
I think it actually might. Like, I think the thing about VR that's interesting is that it's a paradigm shift in how games are interacted with, and in that regard, somebody that comes in with a new shop, with a new studio, with an interesting idea that just hasn't been done before, can get that level of attention that they need to make the jump, right? So that's why people are focusing, not because the cost resets, but because this is your one shot at making that jump from obscurity to we're in the spotlights right now. Very similar to, I think, how you guys jumped with Goat Simulator. It's just a giant leap into just like the public sphere where suddenly everybody was looking in your direction, and that's a lot easier to sustain than anything else at the moment. Like, you need that big thing. Either you need to have it already, and if you have it, like you said, a lot of the mid-sized studios are in big trouble right now, because as the production values go up, like, there's no way to keep the same budgets, the same amount of people, and make the games that they're making. And I think a lot of mid-sized studios right now are in trouble as well, because they've been working on games for 2 or 3 years, and things have just changed so rapidly. Like with the rise of Let's Play, with Twitch and YouTube as a major force in marketing, like, everything that used to be true when they started is no longer true. And if you're not designing your game for spectatorship, or at least with spectatorship in mind, not just for the people playing, but also the people watching over their shoulder or through YouTube, your game is going to have a lot harder time surviving. And I think you also see that, like, the games that are being announced now are all roguelikes, MOBAs, esports, funny things, weird things, stuff that does really well on Twitch and YouTube. Those are the games that are doing well right now. And then the question is, when does that get saturated? And then what do we go to next? But
yeah, there's definitely opportunity. I guess what I was getting at is that
it's not a structural fix.
It's not a structural fix. It's not the same level of reset. And it's also, like, for example, the VR shift, right? Fundamentally, there's something enormous to take advantage of, which is new genres will be born. But you have to be the kind of developer, the kind of designer who says, oh, there's a new genre, I am going to design towards it, or I'm going to design for this market. And I think one of the qualities of the indie market in times of, the 1,000 flowers blooming with so many small independent shops is that as an industry, we really like the creative freedom of not having to do that. And so we get in a habit of saying, oh, well, now is our chance to just do what we want instead of being beholden to the man. But when costs get high, being beholden to the man, doing the marketing plan of chasing an underserved genre, saying, oh, what is it that can crack open this market? It's a very businessy style of thinking. And
yeah, I think that the problem is also, like, if these new types of hardware are going to work, you're going to need, like, one game that's going to, kind of like Half-Life was for PC, and everyone was playing on their television, and then Half-Life came, and then it was like, bam, now everyone is playing PC. The VR is gonna need, like, one of those big games that are just gonna make VR. Like, the reason that you buy VR is to play this one game. Yep. And it's such a huge investment. It's very risky, so I think...
I think that because I've seen, so I played a very early version of a VR game a few days ago, and, like, you can see because I think the interesting thing about indie is that in part it's a quantity game, right? Like, yes. There are so many indies that there are indies for who the thing they really want to do is VR, just inherently. So for them it's not like the business perspective of serving an underserved market. This is what they wanted to do all along, and they're going to do that thing. And the people that are those are going to benefit from this. But
Absolutely.
it's 100%. Again, it's sort of it's less of a reactive thing. It's just that market just opened up, and they're going to jump in there.
And it's going to be so scary for the big guys because your 20 years of making FPS doesn't make you a good VR.
And VR makes it
developer.
terrible.
So
It makes a terrible
yeah,
VR
makes it
game.
bad.
It makes it
Oh my
worse.
God.
So I think that's what the fun thing with VR. It's just going to reset for everyone. Everyone's going to be on equal grounds because no one has made games for this before. And that's going to be a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, the interesting thing is going to be the audience reaction, because all of the big guys have trained players. We've been training players towards certain kinds of, I mean, even look at the big, like most esports also won't work in VR,
Yeah.
right? And so VR's entry cost and development skills, and for both developers and for players, the recipe looks like AAA, right? It looks like, well, you need to have a fair amount of 3D expertise, you need to have really good graphics programming, you need to have a lot of money to buy the headset, so you have to be the kind of person who buys PC rigs or consoles. You need to, if you really want a nice one, you need to dedicate a room, right?
Yeah.
That all sounds like core gamer, but
Is it?
core games are not what's going to work,
Yeah.
right?
I mean-
So that's going to be really interesting to see the
it has to go
expectation of
I-
players changing.
I think that interesting, like as far as VR goes in that regard, like I think esports actually has a pretty big role that they can play there, but in terms of spectatorship, like
Spectators.
less than actual gameplay. It's like you can watch the match like happen just in a virtual world and like just look at it and like look at the things that are happening and see it more as a like a soccer field or a football field from a stadium, and look at it and just look at the things that are interesting. That's a use, so like Rocket League, for example, which is huge right now. If you imagine that with VR as a player, it makes me throw up thinking about it.
Yeah.
But thinking about Rocket League in VR as a spectator actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but I also think that like these big games, like these hardcore games for hardcore audiences, I don't think that's gonna work. I think VR needs to go like mobile did. Like you gotta get a billion people. Like Angry Birds, which I think was the first game to get like $1 billion. You gotta get these huge amounts of casual players to build the base for it, so that it's profitable. Because the hardcore gamers are always gonna buy the headsets and stuff like that, but you need to make it mainstream first if it's gonna play a big role in the industry. If it's not just gonna be like this fun little thing that people
That's
do.
also the central paradox, because as Raph said, like the big issue is that it is expensive. This is not like you buy an iPhone because you need a phone. You don't buy virtual reality for any reason but that it is virtual reality. I don't know if virtual reality is going to work, but it's interesting.
I think it's going to work for the mobile ones, like the ones that cost like $100 that you put your Samsung
Gear for
phone
VR
into. Yeah. But the ones that are as expensive as a computer.
Yeah, Morpheus is really interesting as well, being bundled with PlayStation. I think that, or it's called PlayStation VR nowadays. They announced that yesterday. Like that is very interesting as well as a peripheral. And then it's the question like, does it go the way of the Kinect, or does it go the way of being it's basically the answer to what is the future like, is nobody has any idea, but we're all looking at everything that's happening.
Crystal ball is cloudy.
Yep.
Crystal ball is cloudy. If Apple or Samsung bundle like a VR with their phones, then we're
done.
GG.
It's Facebook is the question mark in this one, because they have the potential to reach so many people with Oculus.
Yeah, I think, I actually talked with Zuckerberg for a little bit, and it was really clear that they are looking. Oculus for them is in many ways a stepping stone to AR.
Yeah.
And really for anybody who's in mobile, AR is very clearly the end game, not VR.
Yeah.
So and the potential for AR outside of games is staggering.
Enormous. Yeah.
It's going to completely reshape everything about our lives. So it's interesting. I think particularly all of us who are geeks who grew up on holodecks or Snow Crash or whatever, it's not that different from the virtual worlds boom. We get caught in this because we love it so, and we grew up with it, we get caught in this vision of immersive environments, and this vision of escaping to fantasy worlds. But time and time again, it's turned out that escaping into fantasy worlds is not the mainstream.
No.
And yeah, when you look at it that way, it's like there's no doubt. Right?
No, VR is a stepping stone for sure.
It's a stepping stone, and the really exciting stuff is going to be
right behind it.
Right behind it. So.
I'm really looking forward to the moment where they make AR glasses that have the capacitive glass that you can make transparent or like untransparent. As soon as you bundle those, you've got VR and AR in one device.
Yeah.
That could be so interesting.
Although the tech guys tell me that it's actually that right now it's basically two completely different technologies.
It is. Yeah, no, if you play with them, they're completely separate, but the obviously like the long-term goal of being able to integrate stuff into our world, HoloLens, but then also being able to lock away. That's kind of what we're looking for.
Yep.
The most important things in the industry is keeping perspective, I think, with how fast things are changing. Like the information that we're really bad at sharing. Like our industry is really bad at sharing in every other way besides talking to each other and actually getting to the point, because we have our blogs and we have but like by the time ideas reach sort of the mainstream developers, they're usually a year outdated, because that's by the time we verify our things. I think being in a space with other developers is both infinitely inspiring and more informative than anything else is. So as far as I'm concerned, visiting events like these, getting together is pretty much crucial to anybody's success, really.
Extremely. Like it's madness to make a game for 2 years and not talk to people for 2 days on places like this. It's extremely important.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many. It's so sad to see, like, but lots of like really ambitious people, good at what they do, and then they just like make the wrong game. Or they make the wrong decisions. They make the same mistakes as someone else that could have taken 5 minutes out of their time to explain. Oh, this worked for us. This didn't work for us.
Yeah, the landscape is so cloudy, complicated, and tangled that you pretty much need to interact with others, get help, get assistance, and get the access to the creativity, the cross-pollination of ideas that comes from interacting with other people who don't quite do what you do. That's what you need, right? Is the different viewpoints. Without that, you're headed off a cliff. And so events like this are just critical.
That first part of that answer was so perfect, like cloudy and tangled. It's like Raph Koster, President 2016. No, but it's 100.
Cloudy and tangled.
Yeah, it's 100% true. Like it's not just the ideas that are like yours, but it's also everything that's slightly away from you, so that you can figure out which direction you're actually taking. Like contrast is so important in figuring out what you're doing, and that's one of the many things an event offers.
You need to find ideas that are really different from yours, so you can steal them.
Yes.